Welcome to AP Biology. This unit is on cellular respiration and other ways that organisms can get energy from their environment. And so this unit, it's important to keep the overview in mind, and you probably understand the overview already, but keep that in mind as we go through it because there are a million little details that you need to understand, but you have to keep those details in the context of the whole process. And so the whole process is that you're getting energy from food. And so you might know this equation already. We're going to start with food. And the food that we're going to talk about is glucose, a carbohydrate. It doesn't have to be glucose, but it's easier to talk about glucose first, and then we'll talk about how you can get energy from amino acids or from fats later. For us, we also use oxygen. So this is called aerobic cellular respiration. Aerobic means there's oxygen. If you put an AN in front of it, anaerobic, that would be no oxygen. And we'll talk about that later, but that's not going to be today. So we start with food and oxygen, and we break this down. And so glucose is this molecule with 6 carbons bonded to each other, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And there's some OHs sticking off of them, right? A whole bunch of them. Whole bunch of OHs sticking off. But what we're doing is breaking these bonds. Break, 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 break. We're going to break a whole bunch of bonds. And so what we end up getting at the end is carbon dioxide. So notice there's no hydrogens attached to it anymore. If we had 6 carbons going in, right, these are the reactants. Then the products that we're going to form, I'm going to write the products down here. The products that we're going to form are 6 carbon dioxide, because if you start with 6 carbons, you're going to have 6 carbon dioxides. And also some water. We need to put some 6s in here to balance the equation. Glucose or food has a lot of energy. If it didn't have energy, you wouldn't eat it. Carbon dioxide and water, not so much. So you can breathe all day and drink water all day and get nothing from that. So if that's all you got, it would be kind of a bummer. So we also get this other thing. Whoops. Called ATP, and I don't have enough space. So let's do this. ATP. And heat. Okay, so that ATP is the product along with the carbon dioxide and the water. And so it's an energy conversion. And so we're going to go into the tiny, tiny details, the minute details of how all of this happens. But while we go through all this, keep in mind what we're trying to do is get energy out of food. So living cells require energy from outside resources. If you are a gorilla or a human, you're going to need to get it from food. If you're a plant, you can make it from sunshine, which is so cool. But even with them, they're going to use photosynthesis. If you're a plant, use photosynthesis to make sugar, but then they're going to break that sugar down and convert it to ATP at some point anyway. So everybody does cellular respiration. Not everybody does aerobic cellular respiration, but everybody does one form of cellular respiration or fermentation, which is a process where you're also breaking down food, glucose, to make some ATP. So everybody does either aerobic cellular respiration or anaerobic cellular respiration or fermentation. Some organisms do more than one. So cool. Okay, so energy flows into an ecosystem as sunlight, and plants use that sunlight in photosynthesis, and that'll be another unit later when we finish cellular respiration. And that energy leaves as heat. So you constantly need a new source of energy. So here's some light energy. Either bacteria or chloroplasts will do photosynthesis. What belongs here? Well, they're going to take carbon dioxide and make glucose, right? So organic molecules. Organic means there's more than one carbon. So that's glucose. And they make oxygen as a byproduct, which means it's kind of a waste product for them, but it's good for us. And then the mitochondria, you remember plants have mitochondria too, right? So animals, plants, and then bacteria would actually just do this process themselves, not in a mitochondrion, but just in their own, think about the outside of the bacterium as their cell membrane is very similar to this inner mitochondrial membrane, remember, because these evolved from bacteria. So anyway, They're going to make ATP, or we're going to make ATP in our mitochondria, and then we release some of that energy as well. We use ATP for pretty much almost every process in our bodies that require energy, moving a muscle, shoving sodium out of a nerve cell. And so the waste product that we get then is carbon dioxide, right? So it's not balanced here, but that's the gist of it. And then plants can take up this carbon dioxide and water and do photosynthesis. Oh my God, so cool. So this unit is on cellular respiration, either in mitochondria or bacteria. And our next unit will be on photosynthesis. So you can forget photosynthesis, kind of. I always want you to keep this picture in your head as we go through all the tiny, tiny little details. Remember this whole cellular respiration thing that's happening here, the ATP2, that's lots and lots of details. We're going to spend several days on this. So the energy stored in a molecule of glucose can be released in either of two methods. Either combustion, which means you're burning it, which is an uncontrolled reaction, and what you lose then is the energy is released as heat and light, right, when you're burning something. Or better yet, cellular respiration, which is a controlled biochemical pathway. So there's a whole bunch of steps. That's what the pathway part means. And biochemical means there's lots of molecules along the way, right? It's not just one step, it's a whole bunch of steps. And it takes place in the mitochondria. Most of it does anyway, unless you're a bacterium, and then it just takes place in your body. Okay, so here's a marshmallow, and if you've ever cooked marshmallows over a fire, you probably dropped them in occasionally, in which case they burn up. So that's the sugar from the marshmallow burning up, and it just releases heat and light. The waste product, though, is going to be carbon dioxide and water. So here's the carbon dioxide, here's the water. If you do cellular respiration instead, that's this one. So if you do cellular respiration, you can break down the glucose, still releasing it into carbon dioxide and water. But in the meantime, you're also going to be able to make ATP. So instead of releasing all of the energy as heat and light, you convert some of the energy from the glucose into ATP, which powers your muscles and your nerves and every single other thing in your body. Okay, so I want you to think of cellular respiration not as one step. It's not. It's a bunch of little steps. And think of them as little steps. So glucose has a lot of energy. And cellular respiration releases that energy, not all at once, like when you burn a marshmallow by accident, but in tiny little steps, so that by the end, by the time you're done, you do have carbon dioxide and water, right? Very low energy. But along the way, you've been able to do it in such a controlled way that you're able to make some ATP so that you can move your muscles and walk. So in cellular respiration, glucose and other organic molecules, fats, proteins, they're broken down in a series of steps, a bunch of little steps, and we're going to look at all those details. Okay, remember catabolic versus anabolic. When you think catabolic, think of this cat eating stuff, which means catabolic means you're breaking stuff down. So catabolic pathways yield energy by oxidizing organic fuels. We haven't talked about oxidizing yet, but that's what we're going to do. So when you break stuff down, generally you are releasing energy. It's generally exergonic. So breakdown of organic molecules is exergonic. Okay, so examples of catabolic pathways that produce ATP, one is called fermentation. It's just a partial degradation of sucrose, which is why, or sugars, which is why you make alcohol with that, because if it were total degradation, it would break it all the way down to carbon dioxide. So we'll come back and talk about fermentation at the very end of this unit. That does not require oxygen, so if you've ever known someone who makes wine, they stopper the top of it so that no oxygen gets in. If it does, you just get sour grape juice. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is aerobic cellular respiration. That means you require oxygen, and cellular respiration requires several steps. It's not a partial degradation, it's a complete degradation. So you start with glucose, and you need oxygen, and you break that glucose completely down to carbon dioxide. There's no hydrogens on there anymore. Glucose is organic because it has 2 or more carbons, has 6 carbons. CO2 is inorganic. So it's a complete breakdown of glucose, and then there's also the waters in here. So anaerobic cellular respiration means there's no oxygen. So it's a bunch of steps, just like aerobic cellular respiration, which we haven't even talked about yet, really, but we'll get there. It's a bunch of steps, and we'll come back to this. We'll circle back to anaerobic cellular respiration at the very end of these notes, and I'll just tell you the difference and how you don't use oxygen. Right now, you're thinking, I don't even know why oxygen is needed. And I understand that, so we're going to get there. But for now, I just want you to have the vocab word. Anaerobic means you do a whole bunch of steps to break down glucose, but you don't use oxygen. So I'll tell you how later. It's a little teaser for the future. So we don't just use glucose for food. We use carbs and fats and proteins to fuel our bodies. But we're going to start by talking about the sugar glucose because it's a little bit easier to talk about that first. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about the proteins and maybe some of the other carbs and some of the fats, which are also actually going to be in there. Yum. All right, here is the overall equation. So make sure you know that equation. Glucose plus oxygen gives you carbon dioxide, water plus released energy in the form of ATP, and then some is released as heat as well. For endotherms like us, meaning organisms who maintain a constant body temperature, right, 37 degrees Celsius. So for us, we do cellular respiration not just to produce the energy we need for our bodies, like for our muscles, not just for ATP, but also we need to keep our body temperature. So I'll tell you how that works later, not today.